Welcome everyone. You're joining the Two-Generation Sustainability or Two-Gen Sustainability webinar. We are recording today's webinar, so if for any reason you need to leave or can't see the video, we will make this video available after the webinar. And also, we welcome your questions. You should have a questions tab on your screen, and you can feel free to type in a question at any point during the presentation. We will have a Q&A session in the last 30 minutes. And so we'll be gathering your questions during that time, and also we'll have availability for you to ask a question in that session live as well. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Lindsay Broyhill with Ascend. And Lindsay, take it away.
Great, thanks, Rachel. So I am Lindsay Broyhill. I'm the Communications Strategist and Manager here at Ascend. I'm also joined by my colleague Ann Mosley, who is Vice President at the Aspen Institute and Executive Director of Ascend at the Aspen Institute, who will speak shortly. And we also have Reggie Bicha, who is the Executive Director of the Colorado Department of Human Services, and Roxane White, who is a mortgage family innovator in residence at Ascend at the Aspen Institute. So before we dive into what the two-generational approach means, we want to give a quick overview of who we are at Ascend and what we do. The Aspen Institute is an educational and policy studies organization with the mission of fostering values-based leadership and providing a nonpartisan venue for dialogue around critical issues. The timeless values that first inspired the Institute's founder to convene intellectuals and business leaders in Aspen after World War II continue to guide the Institute today. Ascend is one of nearly 35 policy programs, and we have campuses here in DC, Hawaii, Maryland, and Aspen, Colorado. We have been led by Walter Isaacson for the last 15 years. He is stepping down this year, and Dan Porterfield, a post-secondary leader with a strong focus on equity and is the current president of Franklin & Marshall, will be stepping in. Ascend was created as a policy program at the Aspen Institute 7 years ago by our executive director, Ann Mosley. Our vision is of an America in which a legacy of educational success and economic security passes down from one generation to the next. At the heart of our work is a two-generation approach. We also take a racial equity and a gender lens to all of our work. Ascend is the national hub for breakthrough ideas and collaborations that move children and their parents toward educational success and economic security. Ascend has three key strategies. We elevate and invest in a portfolio of solutions and products and tools that equip the field to develop and implement two-generation ideas. We build leaders and networks. The Ascend Fellowship and the Aspen Institute Ascend Network, which consists of over 200 organizations in 41 states and is currently growing. We engage the voices of families to inform policies and programs. With a history of bipartisan focus groups and polling, we work with a group of parent ambassadors to help inform and provide feedback on our work. So the two-generation continuum. As I mentioned, the two-generation approach is at the heart of our work. Programs and policies that address the needs of children and their families together can harness the family's full potential, start a cycle of opportunity, and put the entire family on a path to educational success and permanent economic security. Two-generation approaches provide opportunities for and meet the needs of children, parents, and the adults in their lives together. We have recently expanded our definition of two-generation approaches to include the adults in children's lives. We recognize that families come in all shapes and sizes, and grandparents, aunts, uncles, and many others often make up the community of support for children and families. Based on our research and conversations with practitioners, researchers, and policymakers, we have identified 5 key components of two-generation approaches. The evidence shows that programs and policies are most successful when families have access to 5 things: quality early childhood, post-secondary education, economic support, health and mental health services, and social capital, the social networks and community connections on which families rely. Approaches that serve children and their families together recognize that every family, or every member of the family, plays a role in achieving economic security. In addition to the high return on investment in early childhood, we know that one of the best predictors of mobility for a family is the parent's educational attainment. Economic supports are also critical. Supports like the Earned Income Tax Credit and asset-building tools like child savings accounts can provide critical economic stability for families. Social capital is what we at Ascend like to call the secret sauce of two-generation approaches. This is a web of relationships among individuals and institutions that help families thrive. And finally, health and well-being is the last component. If a parent or child is unwell, physically, emotionally, or mentally, it's very difficult for them to participate in school or function at a job. Ensuring access to quality, affordable health care, including mental health care, is also critical. Ascend goes by 5 principles to put children and families at the center. The first is measure and account for outcomes for both children and their parents. Engage and amplify the voices of families. Ensure equity. Foster innovation and evidence together, and align and link systems and funding streams. Ascend is working to help build a field along with other nonprofits, philanthropic organizations, and policy and systems leaders and researchers with an awareness of what the data tells us. The Ascend Network was created to mobilize empowered 2-generation organizations and leaders to influence policy and practice changes that increase economic security, educational success, social capital, and health and well-being for children, parents, and their families. So the Ascend Network, which are these states in orange, is a network of 225 organizations who are implementing 2-generation approaches across the country, as well as the inaugural Ascend Fellows and Ascend Philanthropic Partners. We're expanding the network to ensure that the learning, tools, and policies that are emerging from the network and elsewhere are shared effectively with the field. The network includes leading innovators with significant platforms for scale within the network, such as Head Start, community colleges, United Ways, community action agencies, and community foundations, and others. These deliberately selected partners have the capacity to shift systems and policies within key platforms for scale, with a focus on evidence building in a range of 2-gen issue areas. We also have 41 fellows implementing 2-gen action plans, from examining the role of brain science in supporting parent support interventions to reimagining community action agencies as 2-gen centers. Ascend Fellows learn from outstanding faculty, participate in Signature Institute convenings and platforms, have powerful networks of social justice and other leaders, and carry out action plans that advance their innovations and solutions on behalf of children and families. We have worked with state leaders across the country, and today we're fortunate to hear from 2 of our fellows, Reggie and Roxane, about how to sustain 2-gen work at the state level, as well as core values like the importance of equity and family voice. So now I'll hand it over to Mosley, who will share a few words.
Hi there, everybody. Great to be on the call with you all, and good job on getting technology supporting change that is dynamic and moving at the state and local level. So good afternoon, everybody. This is Mosley here in Aspen Ascend in Washington, D.C. And I just had a couple highlights to share as we kick off this really fantastic webinar. And, really at the headline level, I just want to underscore from where we sit, we are seeing tremendous leadership, momentum, and cross-sector and cross-agency collaboration to put children, parents, and families at the center of policy, systems, and practices, and at the same time, really building from the strength and the resilience and the expertise that is from and of families. This is a super this is a fantastic webinar where we're going to get a chance to go deep on Colorado. And I think both by the fact you look at 2 extraordinary leaders, Roxane White and Reggie Bicha, and their respective teams over the past few years have been building on a great history of the state of Colorado that is about independence, entrepreneurial leadership, about children and families. And as we think about kind of the last moment in a second term of Governor Hickenlooper's administration that really has pioneered the 2-generation approach and bipartisan approaches to moving a durable, transformational agenda for children, parents, and families with a 2-gen twist. We're excited to be sharing this work with you coming up. And I would just highlight, when we think about how change happens in a great state like Colorado, where you have 64 counties, great state partners, and also very strong county leadership. This is really building up from a position of tremendous experience and commitment. Ascend in October convened 14 state teams actually at our campus for the 2-gen Policymaker Institute, the 3rd convening of its nature, that really went deep on bringing agency directors together and frontline staff across human services, health, early childhood, education, labor, post-secondary, to look at what are the strategies and innovations that can be accelerated and also be embedded as we think about this moment in time with 36 gubernatorial elections coming up in a time of great transition and dynamism at the national level. I wanted to just highlight, You'll get a chance to go deep here in this webinar, but we will also be hosting Governor Hickenlooper and Reggie Bicha, and Roxane will be here leading the way on April 5th for a kickoff of the Aspen Solution Series to continue to go deeper on this conversation. I'd like to do a shout out to the many states that are also doing this work. I won't list everybody, but stay tuned as we prepare in the upcoming months to release a second case study around 2Gen as a way to transform health and human services in the great state of Tennessee. And we will be hearing from continued conversation with Governor Hickenlooper, but also Governor Haslam, and highlighting the leadership of Commissioner Daniel Barnes and former Commissioner Raquel Hatter and their teams. So I just highlight that to say there are states working on this, they're rolling up the sleeves, incredible lessons learned and strategies to deepen and accelerate. And at the same time as we look at states, I just want to highlight that our county sisters and brothers are working along the 2Gen track as well. Just this weekend, we will be partnering with the National Association of Counties and their president, Commissioner Brooks from the great state of Texas. He and Marjorie Sims will be leading a series around 2Gen with the wonderful NACO staff, including also commissioners such as Commissioner Nancy Sharp of the state of Colorado, Commissioner Ebert of Weber County in Utah, and also Commissioner Tony Carter of the great state of Minnesota. So it's just exciting to see there is gridlock and challenges here in Washington, but we are seeing tremendous momentum and innovation at the state and county level. Roxane White, who the former CEO of the Nurse Family Partnership, is now formally the innovator in residence here for the Ascend team. Stay tuned, more from her as the team looks to pull together a publication that will highlight top solutions and strategies for states and communities, which will be releasing in May. And for Reggie Bicha, who's been a long-time leader in the field of human services from nationally, Wisconsin, and here in Colorado. I'm about to turn the car keys over to them to go deeper on this work, but I really want to thank them for their leadership and their work, and also thank the Mortgage Family Foundation, which has endowed the innovator in residence, as well as other partners, the Packard Foundation, the Kellogg Foundation, Bezos, Chambers, Kresge, and a few others. Without their partnership in this work, we would not be able to make the kind of change we need to at the state level, which is where we think the greatest opportunity for children, parents, and families lies. So that's for me. Roxane, I'm going to give the car keys over to you.
Thank you so much. And we know that we need to be ready for gubernatorial transitions, which are planned transitions. And there's 36 governors who are up for election this fall in 2018, of which 17 have already announced or are term limited. So we know that we have a lot of transitioning happening across the country. In addition to that, there's always the unanticipated changes that happen. And, you know, when I used to work in state government, sometimes I would refer to that as, oops, got hit by the bus. You know, and changes happen. Hopefully they're good changes and easy changes and not changes that happen because of a legislative session or something like that. But we always want to be prepared for changes to happen. And we want to be ready to sustain the work so that when we leave our individual positions, the work on behalf of families and children does not go away. And so as we think about that, we think about making certain that we have clear roadmaps for the future. And what do we need to do? And I want to talk for a minute about what Colorado has done. And I was fortunate to be able to start the Colorado journey in 2Gen with a call from one of the local funders that we knew well here in the community, who asked if she could bring the Ascend staff and Ann Mosley specifically to come visit with me in my role as Chief of Staff for Governor Hickenlooper. And that started my journey way back in 2011 with really understanding this 2Gen movement and what could be done. And Colorado had already been working on 2Gen, but the increased support and emphasis from the Ascend team, as well as our local community, propelled the work forward and put it on a train that has just not been stoppable, and that we want to make certain does not stop as we move to a gubernatorial change in Colorado as well. And so the work that started with the Department of Human Services was deepened when Reggie became an Ascend Fellow. And then we moved that work to other cabinet heads and deeper in not just the Department of Human Services, but deeper across the entire state government. and looked for ongoing support and grant-funded support that would help the work not just have legs in Colorado, but also be sustainable. And I'm going to turn it to Reggie now. We're going to tag team back and forth a little bit about how some of that work came to life as we found the governor picking up steam and the community picking up steam around 2Gen and why it was so important for families in Colorado.
Thanks, Rox. Good morning, everyone. Glad to be with you. But we're thrilled that you've joined us here in Denver to talk with you about this. Rox tells a story from the perspective as the governor's chief of staff and the Aspen Institute and funders reaching out to her. I tell the story from the perspective of a new cabinet member who had just moved into Colorado. And my new boss called me into her office and said, I want you to meet with these people. And it was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me, both professionally and personally, being introduced to Ascend and the Aspen Institute. When Rox and Governor Hickenlooper recruited me to Colorado, they had a vision of wanting to do things differently for 21st century families that built upon the knowledge we have around brain science, the knowledge we have around linking prospective employees to employers who are hiring, and a new demand for a different type of workforce in the 21st century. They had a vision about what we should be thinking about and doing differently to close the achievement gap for young children who are not prepared to hit kindergarten, much less to continue their education and graduate from high school. It's a lofty ambition, but 2Gen gives us a framework, a philosophy, and brings together the right components that have helped us to be strong and design a new way of helping families overcome poverty in our state. Governor Hickenlooper has become an incredible champion of this. As a matter of fact, he has referred to 2Generation in his State of the State addresses. He's spoken on this issue here in Colorado and across the country, and I'm pleased to know that he's going to be with Ascend in April of this year to talk more about it. So this started out as a vision, Rox, with an idea and a new framework about how we can do 2Gen work, and we've been really fortunate that this concept has really come to life. We have created a state human services model that has received some recognition across the country, but has been a focal point of bringing together partners from both inside state government and outside state government to put together a real specific plan of action about what we can do to embrace 2Gen. I told my team when we came up with this approach back in 2011, 2012, let's not make 2Gen something new. It shouldn't be a new initiative. How do we take the work that we're already doing, that we're already charged to fulfill for kids and families, and do it in a way that they need to experience us? Thinking about parents who are wanting to get not just a job, but a good paying job that is going to help them to meet their needs and their families' needs, and at the same time invest in their young children to be prepared for kindergarten and all the ways that we think about that, and help them to find childcare and other work supports that are going to help those parents to be successful in this generation and continue to the next generation. We've created a fellowship system in Colorado in partnership with the Aspen Institute and with the Zoma Foundation, where now we have about 20-some fellows across Colorado that are going through their own 2Gen initiation.
So Reggie, let me just add to that. So, when we think about sustainability, one of the things we think about is how do you add leaders to the table? And so what Ascend wanted to make certain that happened was that it wasn't just Reggie, and it wasn't just the other cabinet heads, or it wasn't just Governor Hickenlooper. And the fellowship is a way to really deepen and make certain that this work is owned where it should be, by the communities, and that our communities have stepped up, and we have leaders in each community that are willing to step forward and to help sustain the work. And we're looking at those leaders to also help with transition, and to think about when a governor transitions, who will we make certain are on our transition teams? Who will speak up from the community and say, this is not a Hickenlooper legacy. This is something we own and want in the community. And one of the things that Ascend does is webinars like this to help spread the word and to help create more people who are interested in 2Gen. And so that fellowship is really a deliberate piece of not just deepening the work, but also making certain that the work is sustained, and that we have other partners to come to the table as we think about a transition.
I think that's such a powerful and key component, probably the most important that I can think of in preparing for a transition in government, is to get stakeholders who believe and know and are committed to a way of doing business, and making something like TwoGen not be affiliated with any party or any administration, but rather a way of doing business in your state. And having people who are champions and can speak to the power of this work, not after the election, not just after the election, but also during the campaign, to influence candidates who might be thinking about and putting together their own agenda for health, human services, and education. It's so important to make TwoGen a part of that conversation.
And we want those fellows, and we want you all to be out as you have elections in your communities, to be asking the question, how do you think about families and children together? What are you thinking about in terms of outcomes for parents and children together? How can we help candidates think together about this across all parties, across all elected offices? Because what we know is that when the government is able to do this work, we're able to bring additional resources to the table. That's only a piece of the puzzle. The bigger pieces of the puzzle come when families are demanding that they be worked with as a parent and a child together, or parents and children together. When community providers say, this works in our community. And when together we have the data that shows it's better for adults, it's better for children because we've done this work. And that is the sort of thing that I think we all want at every level of our community, and makes it easy for our political leaders to also say, I want to have TwoGen in my state too. I want to improve TwoGen in my state. We are going to have better outcomes for communities, for families, because we have really thought about and worked with families as a whole unit.
You know, Rox, we created in Colorado a pilot initiative we called COPep, which is a new way of helping parents in our child support program develop relationships with their children, non-custodial parents who don't have one, helping non-custodial parents get a job, get housing, get other support, so that they'll have a better chance of paying child support for their kids on time every month. I tell you that because it was built in a TwoGen lens, but it has helped us to engage the employment community, businesses who, some 230 businesses that we have worked with across the state through another initiative called Rehire, which is related to our COPep program. These folks also have become champions around TwoGen and can speak about it from a business perspective, having a qualified worker with some additional support from the government on our side, who comes to work every day, willing to show great product and to invest in those small businesses, has been really critical and becomes an important part of this.
Well, and Reggie, you know, I'm a big fan of COPep, and I'm particularly a fan of the movement that has happened in Colorado to not make it child support enforcement, but to make it child support services.
Yeah.
Because what Colorado did was they started by listening to the voices of families, and they found that, you know, what we all know is that families and dads, in particular dads, because 85% of the people who have been served in COPep were dads, who were not connected to their children. And when they stepped back and looked at behavioral understanding and used behavioral methodology, they found that the dads really did want to be connected, both economically and emotionally, to their children. And so they redesigned their services. And Reggie and I have a blog coming out the first week of March about COPep and the work there and the outcomes. But what's really amazing is the significant, over 2/3 of those dads have now connected and are paying financially and engaging financially, but much more importantly, or as importantly, are also engaging emotionally with their children. And Reggie also referenced the SWIFI project, which is an amazing other collaboration in Colorado between departments of higher education and community college and childcare. And again, looking at how do you bring these families together. Colorado has also been really fortunate to be one of our Pact states, and Pact is parents and children Thriving Together, and it is an initiative of the National Governors Association, Ascend, and the Center for Law and Social Policy. And Reggie, tell us a little bit about what's happening with Pact in Colorado.
Well, Pact has been great to be able to partner with the Aspen Institute, with the National Governors Association, and 4 other states across the country who are taking different tracks, but are really concentrating on doing 2Gen work. We had a huge conference last November, I think around 500 people from across the state, all different sectors coming together to learn about, understand, and be committed to what we can do at all levels, from local government, nonprofits, faith communities, the business sector, philanthropists, and others, as well as local and state government, all be committed to working in a common agenda around 2-generation approaches. Ours is sort of wonky, our work plan for our Pact Initiative, because what we're wanting to do is really embed in some of our infrastructure around data collection, data sharing, data agreements, and so forth, because we know that kids who come in through our early childhood door are going to link up to kindergarten in K-12 education, who eventually are going, their parents may already be, or they will one day be in secondary education, higher ed. We know that they might be touched in our correctional or criminal justice system, in our healthcare system, and we think it can be incredibly powerful from a 2Gen perspective if our agencies and organizations can share information in a much more coordinated and effective way, and better from a research perspective if we can gather information in the long term and see how someone or a family unit progresses as a result. So that's really been our effort around the Pact Initiative and the work that we've been working on with, I think it's 10 other state agencies in Colorado.
That's great. And there's 5 Pact states, and I'll just tell you who those are if you're not familiar with them, but they're Georgia, Oregon, Colorado, New Jersey, and Maryland. And those states, so if you take Georgia, for example, one of the things they're doing is they have a real push on their technical education. And they are bringing together their community colleges and their technical education with their child care. And really working hard to ensure that when parents are trying to further their education, there's early childhood care for those children. And so that when mom and dad are trying to do better, children are doing better. And they found amazing results that, you know, when parents are engaged in homework and studying, they're also supporting more books in the family. They're supporting more educational tools for their children at the same time. And of course, the end goal with everything we do in 2Gen is to increase the overall economic assets of the family. Because what we want people to do is to build assets so they can move out of poverty. Oregon is really tackling their dropout rates, particularly for children of color. And what is happening that they're hugely disproportionately for their African American children, they're not getting out of high school. And what can be done to bring systems together so that families as a total engage in the education process, and that families feel supported to engage in the educational process, and that the child can do better in school. So it's some really exciting work around the country that is also getting at this issue of how do you sustain the momentum? How do you have it across departments? How do you have governor's offices? In the case of the Pact states, every single governor's office has a person who is designated to work on 2Gen and to help sustain that work. What's also really important is as these states go through gubernatorial transitions is that is work that will be included in the transition documents and thought about and talked about as next steps of where these states are going. And it really moves us to the great work that has happened in Colorado, where you've really seen some good policy changes and some sustainability work here, Reggie, that's really exciting.
Well, thanks, Rox. Particularly not just at the state level, but also at the county level. We've got about 10 to 12 counties across Colorado who have embraced 2Generation and are doing everything from very unique housing projects to robust partnerships with nonprofit organizations and a whole variety of things. We had, back to sustainability and transitions, we had an executive team meeting here a few weeks ago, and we invited former Colorado Governor Ritter to come and speak to our team about what it meant to transition and so forth. And he said something quite profound I thought was really helpful. He was a Democrat, followed a Republican two-term Governor Bill Owens, and then he served one term, and Governor Hickenlooper took office. And he said, transitions really are about building upon the work of the previous administration. There's a lot of talk most often about, we're going to do things differently and go on a different agenda, but at the end of the day, much of that work is building on where the state has been and where they're going for the next term. And that really helped influence our thinking and our work about preparing for transitions. One of the things that we've done in Colorado that I think will be helpful is to develop a roadmap to bring together those sectors we talked about earlier, to say, what is it that we agree to? Where do we see that there's opportunities and efforts that we can put underway that can really blossom if we give it some time and attention, and build consensus and agreement and put it in writing with a series of action steps that we have. And we're happy to share the roadmap that we've created in Colorado. I think you can get it at the Ascend website. You can also get it at colorado.gov at our website at CDHS. We'd be happy to share it.
But I think it's really important, Reggie, when I was managing a transition team and we were fortunate enough to get to hire you and bring you onto the team, one of the things that was really helpful for us coming in and as we thought about transition is that there were roadmaps, and those roadmaps had easy wins for us as a new administration.
Oh, boy.
And so one of the things that I am constantly encouraging people who are in transitions is you don't have to get every single thing done. If you want the new administration to own the work, give them some easy wins. Tell them where they could go next. When you are new as a new governor, when you're new as a new mayor, I've had the opportunity to serve in both cases, you're looking for some good, easy wins. And the best things that people could do to help us sustain prior work was to give us some wins. Give us the roadmap that shows us the things that could be done. We got handed legacy projects that were all nicely wrapped up in a bow, and we had nowhere to go with them. And so we didn't lean in and own those as our agenda or the state's agenda. That was the prior governor, the prior mayor's work, and it was all done. Whereas when we had some easy wins, we had some next steps we could do with the legislature, we had some recommendations from families that really set us up to embrace and sustain the work. And so I think that because we're all perfectionists, or we wouldn't be on this call, we oftentimes try to wrap things up completely and hand it off all done, instead of saying, I brought it this far. This is work that I hope you will do. This is how to continue it. Because I think the other thing that it does is it really validates the staff who are long-term staying. And, whether you are the leader of an organization or a supervisor or you're working in state government, some people have a natural come and go. Political appointees leave. They are appointed for terms. It's only a few get to stay past one governor.
Are you giving me a hint that
yes, Reggie, it is coming. I'm sorry. But, November of 2018 will happen. There will be an election. And by January, you are going to be working on two gens somewhere
I will be
else,
getting my own employment program.
Yes. Your children and you will be, we will be thinking about both of you. But as we think about that transition, how do we leave the next person some things that they can do? We've all taken on a new job, and one of the things we want to do when we take on a new job is go, yes, I got it done. I did something. Woohoo, right? And the more a roadmap can include those things, the more likely it is to be embraced. One of the things that I really want to encourage people to do right now is, if you've been talking about 2Gen as a legacy of this, your current administration, whether your administration is in a nonprofit or your administration is at a state level or municipality level, stop talking about it as a legacy project. Stop talking about it as belonging to you. Talk about it as belonging to our families. This work should be always centered in what do our families need. And we got to pick up the baton for a period of time and run it down that road. But it's been work, in Colorado, this is work that's been going on for a couple of decades. I think we're getting better at it all the time. But we don't have to talk about it as, even though Governor Hickenlooper has embraced it as his legacy, it is work that he took the baton from Governor Ritter, and hopefully he will get the chance to pass the baton on to the next governor on behalf of our families.
I think that's exactly right. And it's normal in any type of change that any human beings go through, particularly a gubernatorial transition, to see it as a threat, as a time of fear, a worry that we'll go backwards instead of moving forwards. I like to think of it slightly differently. I think of it as an opportunity to accelerate the movement that has been made. How do we position our state, your communities to not just prevent going backwards, but to move forward in a way that's going to take your 2Gen work to another level. I'm reminded by what happened in Congress a couple weeks ago. They passed a budget bill, and that budget bill contained a whole lot of things in there that other people may have considered to be an Obama legacy. They reauthorized McVee for 5 years.
Right. Home visitation, if that acronym doesn't automatically make sense to you.
There was child welfare reform that we had been working on for 6-8 years that we couldn't get through, called the Families First Act. That all of a sudden got approved in a budget bill. I could go on and on, but the point that I'm trying to make is that there's an opportunity to accelerate rather than, if we embrace that, rather than going backwards, even when there's significant political shifts, including the White House from a Democrat to a Republican.
Right. Give the next person the opportunity to go down the road. Well, I think, are we about ready to move to questions? I think we have some questions that are already coming in, and you please keep submitting your questions because we can see them. And we are happy to continue to have this dialogue on this important work.
Anyone watching, if you do have questions, we're going to kick off with a couple little kind of get you guys used to it, but you can definitely post your question in your GoToWebinar interface there. Just type it in and we'll see it. And also, if you raise your hand, we can also possibly unmute you if you'd like to ask it live. So I will kick things off with one question. How can someone build buy-in with their staff on the importance of 2Gen work? How do you make it not just your own passion, but you help the rest of your department and your staff get on board?
It's a great question. So I can tell you that the way we embrace it at the Colorado Department of Human Services was me telling our folks, we're not going to make this a new initiative. Don't think of this as one more thing we have to do. Let's not think of this as, where am I going to go build new programs or find more money? The little secret is, it turns out that happened because folks embraced it and thought about new ideas and wanted to move it forward. But that wasn't the goal. We created a program as a part of the healthcare reform effort. We knew to get more people eligible for Medicaid and for other public assistance programs, we were going to have to rebuild our computer system infrastructure. My counterpart at our Medicaid agency and I and our Office of Information Technology said this is an opportunity to do this in a way that is 2Gen in nature. So we built a platform called Peak, which is an online enrollment system where folks can not only go on to begin the process to apply for Medicaid, but they can also apply for food assistance, for childcare assistance, for free and reduced lunch, for in K-12, WIC, and a whole host of other public assistance programs. And the system was built in a way that was sort of intuitive. If you put in your information because you think you need to apply for Medicaid, it will tell you, yeah, you might be eligible for Medicaid, but you may also be eligible for these other programs. Would you like to learn more? That was taking work that we were going to do and had to do anyway, but doing it in a way that made it 2Gen and more applicable to families in need. And that's the type of thing that I think can help instill and change a culture that can be embraced by people who are already doing the work.
You'll find a number of materials as well on the Ascend website, and it's categorized for you about, 2Gen 101, 201, 301 to help you move through that. I really want to highlight that if you take a look at the Colorado Guide to 2Gen, it talks about the stages that Colorado went through, from the initial approach to full implementation and data. And it's a great roadmap. But I also want to hold up some of the work that two of our other states have been doing. Tennessee did an amazing job, and there will be a report out on Tennessee coming from Ascend in May. So Governor Haslam will be releasing it with Ascend, as Governor Hickenlooper did with the Colorado Guide to 2Gen, talking about the stages they went through. And some of what they did was to bring the community together, to provide education to the community and to their employees about 2Gen. And then they brought in families and listened to families and what families wanted. And then they kept coming back together with families, with staff, with community providers to say, how do we do this together? And really created a community accountability group as well that helps them. They post on the Tennessee Department of Human Services their outcomes, their results, their videos. Mississippi took a little bit of a different approach initially. They felt like they really needed to do a whole lot more for their families around behavior and what were behavioral interventions. And so they started with a twofold training for their entire employees and then as well for their community providers. The first thing they did was they felt like motivational interviewing would really help them. And so they did a curriculum on motivational interviewing, and then they overlaid that with really doing a training on 2Gen. And what does 2Gen mean, and why is it important, and how could you bring motivational interviewing and 2Gen together so the families were able to talk not just about their own individual needs and desires, but their hopes and dreams for their children, and to bring that understanding of 2Gen and whole family into the motivational interviewing process. So they have a lot posted on their website as well. So just encourage you to take a look at the Ascend website to learn from Tennessee, to learn from Colorado, to learn from Mississippi, whether you are a community provider or a state entity, because the lessons were really applicable across all the sectors.
Tennessee's got a case study coming out?
Tennessee has a case study coming out.
It's probably not going to be as good as Colorado's, but it might give you something, so that would be good to. You know, here's some nuts and bolts things that you can do. If you're in office now, assuming that you're on the track or your administration's on the track to transfer, you've got some time. One of the things that we're beginning to do is to build into our job descriptions for our civil service staff 2-generation language, so that as we're hiring people or doing performance plans with them, it's now becoming a part of how they do their work. Also, really important, contracts. We're contracting with, in our agency, literally thousands of nonprofit organizations in Colorado, largely nonprofits, and putting performance expectations or 2Gen approaches in our contracts. One of the ones that I'm most proud of is our work around refugee services. And we had to find a new refugee service agency to partner with, and we created an RFP, a request for proposal, that was specifically 2Gen in nature. So all of the respondents had to come up with a 2Gen approach to do that work.
Great. Have another question for us?
We do have another question, and this actually might drive a little bit back to what you were just talking about, Roxane. How has listening to families changed the work that we do through 2Gen?
Well, you know, let's kick it to Reggie first and let him talk more about COPep and some of the other places where you've been listening to families, and then I'll tag on to that.
Well, child support, I'll tell you, gather together a group of parents who owe child support and can't get ahead and ask them what their experience has been like. And they'll tell you that everything from feeling disrespected, overwhelmed because they don't know the court process, they feel as if they can't afford to live on their own, to have a place to live and to get their own food, much less be able to have something to be able to give to their kids. And they feel as if the system is out to get them rather than to help them to be successful. Hearing that and really allowing it to influence our thinking was what went into helping us to develop both COPep and was an initiative we call Rehire Colorado. The whole notion of, if we listen to parents and can help them to get a job, get stabilized, get access to treatment, to develop a relationship with their child. The science tells us that if you have a relationship with your child, you're more likely to care for and pay for that child. And the research also tells us that those kids do better in life when they have a relationship with both parents, even if the parents aren't living in the same household. That really has gone to influence our work. Talking to parents and hearing from them about the difficulty of getting childcare and being able to afford childcare, and not just childcare where my kid is sitting on a couch, but childcare that's actually going to help my child to learn their letters and shapes and numbers and social skills and get nutritious food. And hearing from parents in that way has helped us to think about and design a whole new approach to childcare. And in Colorado, a much more specific focus on rural in frontier parts of our state where there's not any childcare, much less high quality childcare.
So along those lines, as Anne referenced, Ascend will be publishing the top policies and solutions that states have been using in May, and I'll get that finished by then. And some of what I've learned is Connecticut, for example, brought together a group of parents and had a parent panel and a parent academy, and they spent 2 days with parents and children together, interacting with their departments and talking to each other, and it resulted in changes in legislation. It resulted in fatherhood being written into contracts, and it resulted in some changes in how home visitation was done. So just really listening to that piece. If you go to the Tennessee Department of Human Services, they have a website. They have a number of YouTube videos of parents talking about their experience and what they wanted to change. I was on the phone the other day with a department that had just done some focus groups with their families who were in temporary assistance for needy families in their TANF program. And they discovered that unbeknownst to them, and this is a small thing, but such a large thing when I tell you what it was, that the parents were not able, they came in and got a number. But if they didn't respond when their number was called, of course, then they go to the back of the line because the assumption was the parents had left. But you couldn't hear the numbers being called in the restroom. So the parents were afraid to go to the restroom while they waited for appointments. You know, none of us want our parents and our families to experience that. But if we don't ask, we may not know.
Right.
Because that's a hard one to say, you know, I can't go to the restroom because I'll lose my, you know, how do you say that to someone? So just stopping to ask, sometimes it's big things like how do we think about fatherhood being incorporated in contracts? And sometimes it's little things like I can't be in your office and wait in line that long and not use the restroom without the fear of losing my place in line.
Well, it looks like we have one more question. Again, something you guys might have touched on a little bit earlier, but what recommendations do you have for ensuring that this work does not get undone with a new governor?
So Reggie and I both been through transitions and administrations. He's been through Wisconsin already and about to go through Colorado. Reggie, you want to start?
Well, a whole variety of strategies, right? Some of the nuts and bolts things that we've already talked about, contracting, going out and getting grants that commit your state. We're about to, we just had our Child and Family Service Review, which for child welfare is a big deal where the federal government comes out and evaluates your state. And we're going to have to do a program improvement plan. Every state does them. Well, it's a real opportunity for us to put into writing what we're going to do for the next 2 years in child welfare and do so in a way that is TwoGen in our perspectives. Having a list of people who are champions. You know, a new governor has to appoint sometimes hundreds of people. I think in Colorado it's about 200 appointees across state government. And it can be hard to find good qualified people. Having a list ready to share with the governor and his or her transition team of here are folks that are smart, are capable, they care about TwoGen, and they are interested in being a part of your transition team, or excuse me, being a part of your new administration, can be really powerful to jumpstart the work of a new governor and to make certain that they're moving this initiative forward in a positive way.
A couple things that I would add to that is, as Reggie talked about grants, oftentimes as you wrap up an administration, you try to spend every penny you possibly can and wrap up the grant. And when you do that, that pretty much ensures that there's no obligation to the new administration to continue the work. So anything you can do to save dollars, give it to the new administration with the roadmap. I really want to encourage people, don't do that thing that we're all inclined to do, which is spend every cent we can, because that will almost surely help put a nail in a coffin instead of helping it get legs and move forward. So keeping some of that grant money, starting now, talking to other people around the community of how are you going to help us keep this work going? This isn't my work, it is our work. It is not too early to be thinking about those things. I can tell you in both on the transition teams that I've worked with cities, as well as transition teams that I've worked with and led at states, Folks who did well started preparing their materials by June for November elections. They knew who they wanted on transition teams. They had recommendations for all parties. They had recommendations across the candidates. They had, so that the day that the announcement was made of who was going to chair the transition teams, materials started to come in. And they can't be generic materials. They need to be the materials that are specific to your state. And like I said, anything you can do to point to easy wins, easy legislative wins, easy administrative wins. We all want those easy executive order wins. So really thinking about that, easy wins with the community, and easy wins with families.
Easy wins by eliminating barriers or regulations. Doesn't matter the party, every politician wants to get rid of regulations. And we all know that there's a lot of requirements that government puts in place that only interferes with 2Gen. Teeing those up and suggesting them to transition teams can be very powerful.
All right, well, that's all the questions we had from our webinar, but any last words about 2Gen you'd like to leave our audience with?
I guess what I would say is Ascend is here to help you. And we're here to help you ensure that this work gets sustained. So we hope you will rely on us and rely on the materials. Our families need us to make certain this work continues. And we owe it to them to do the hard work, oftentimes through election seasons and other changes. You know, we all want to bury our heads in the sand, but our families need us to be bold on their behalf.
Be bold on their behalf. I like that. That's great. As I mentioned earlier, gubernatorial transitions, legislative transitions can be tough sometimes. They can cause fear and anxiety for people who care about the work. But we can also see it as an opportunity. Take the time to make investments, come up with plans, recognize that this isn't an administrative or an administration's ownership of 2Gen, but rather a way that your community, your state does the work of 2Gen. Find solutions that speak to all parts of the political equation and tee it up in ways through champions, again, also of all parts of the political equation that makes sense. And lastly, invite the folks we're serving and doing the work on behalf of to the table. Let them speak their own voice, their own truth, their own perspectives to who's ever in charge. And let's not wait until the election to do this work. Let's start the work now. Thanks so much for being with us today. It's great to join you.
Thank you.